In this session, we're going to think about reliability within the transmission system as it exists, and in the next session we'll talk about transmission as one of the concerns. So with that, I'll turn it over to Susanna Burkauer from University of Pennsylvania.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Very happy to be here. I'm a professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And I want to talk about power quality. So I'll talk a little bit about electric cooking as well. And of course, reliability is a big issue. If there's a power outage during dinner time, you can't cook. But I also want to raise the issue of the actual quality of the power that you get even when there is electricity. So here I'm showing voltage that was measured at some households in the US. So in the US, nominal voltage is 120. You can see that most of the time, voltage that actually comes out of your socket is pretty similar. Here I'm showing voltage that we measured using our own technologies, the GridWatch technologies, across different cities in Africa. And you can see that, for example, in Dar es Salaam, where we're doing an electric cooking project, basically power never actually reaches nominal voltage. And it's on the bars here are showing kind of 95, 90%, and it's often at 80% or 70% of nominal voltage. We did this in Kenya as well. I actually showed this graph to the executive management board of Kenya Power. They had never seen this data. This is not actually data that utilities themselves usually collect. And so this is across 4 different rural villages. So you can see even within a single country, there's often huge differences. So this is, again, each line is one household, just a random week that we chose here. You can see a lot of patterns here, right? 7 p.m. when everybody is cooking, coming home from work, that's when voltage dips the most because there's the most demand. And so the technology here is the GridWatch device, which Nline is a startup that was created to deploy these devices. It's about the size of a cell phone. You plug it in. It measures whenever there's power loss or power restoration. It measures voltage, period, and frequency on kind of a 2-minute or even more frequent basis. You deploy them by just actually plugging them into households or firms, wherever you're interested in measuring power, and they report in real time when it detects a power outage. And so if you have, let's say, 100 devices in a city, and they all report a power loss in the same, let's say, 10th of a second, you can say with certainty that, or with relative certainty, that there is a power outage. And so if you deploy these devices strategically, you can say, okay, if this set of households report an outage, but not this other set of households, then probably it's this particular piece of infrastructure that's experiencing an outage right now. And if all of the devices go out, you know that it's a very high voltage network outage. If it's just a subset, it's a low voltage outage, et cetera. So there, Nline is working with utilities in Sierra Leone and Ghana and elsewhere to actually offer this information in real time to utilities to help them respond faster to outages as they happen. They offer this kind of real-time dashboard as well to allow them to engage. This is a screenshot from Accra in Ghana, where there was a long-time collaboration with ECG in Accra. So why does power quality matter? I want to transition now to a project that I did in Kenya, where we find that when households transition from cooking with a charcoal stove to an induction stove, this is manufactured by ECOA, they increase their energy consumption by about 20 kilowatt hours a month. So this is an important revenue stream potentially for the utility. But it saves households $100 per year in total energy spending. So they have to spend a little bit more on electricity, but they're spending a lot less on charcoal. And because the grid in Kenya is 90% renewable, and charcoal is incredibly dirty, high emissions, it reduces 3 tons of CO2 per year. Each stove that is adopted reduces 3 tons of CO2 per year. That's twice as much, or maybe about the same, as when a household in the US switches from a gasoline vehicle to an electric vehicle. Electric vehicle is $40,000. This stove is $80, right? You can do the math. And so we estimate here that if you offer subsidies for electric stoves, that reduces CO2 at a cost of $6 per ton abated. In the US, the cost of the government is around $1,000 per ton of CO2 abated. So if you're interested in reducing your CO2 emissions as fast as possible and as cheaply as possible, this is an incredible opportunity. The company here sells carbon offsets in international offsets markets, and that's a major revenue stream for them as well that allows them to lower the effective price of the stove for Kenyan households. Of course, you can imagine that voltage fluctuations might interfere with stove usage. And so we're also deploying the GridWatch devices that I just showed with these households, and you can directly see that when voltage drops, the actual heat that comes from the device goes down. It's harder to actually cook your meals. And so we're currently studying how this affects things like take-up and usage. Most people still own a charcoal stove. So you might say, you know, on some days I'll still cook with charcoal, and some days I'll switch. So given these power quality issues, is there something that utilities can do? So I'll just highlight one other project here that I did in Ghana. If I can see the next slide. Let's see if this works. Oh, there we go. So this is a project evaluating MCC, Millennium Challenge Corporation, investments in Accra. They installed 150 new transformers across the city of Accra. And so we had a set of treatment neighborhoods where they installed new transformers and a set of control neighborhoods where they didn't. And this is showing voltage levels recorded by the GridWatch devices in the areas where new transformers were installed. Those are in red, and areas where those transformers were not installed. And you can clearly see a big improvement in voltage quality, actually right up to the nominal level after the transformers were constructed, with basically no change in the control areas. I will say this was a relatively expensive investment. So if you actually do the math on, okay, how much economic growth did this create compared to the cost of the investment, it depends on what you count here as your costs and benefits. But I imagine that there's lots of different opportunities, lots of different types of investments that utility could make to see improvements here. So I'm gonna wait for the clicker. There we go. So to summarize, we need better measurement, right? These measurements are things that utilities usually don't actually have. Quality measurements enable utilities to improve power quality. Those improvements can increase electricity usage. Things like electric cooking and other types of electrification also increase electricity usage, and this can generate really important revenue streams for utilities that are currently financially unsustainable. So I'll leave it there. I've posted kind of the papers here if you're interested in looking at any of the data. This takes a couple seconds when I get impatient. So if you're interested in learning more, these are the papers that I've referenced from, and I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Susanna. And next, we'll have Robin Meeks from Duke Sanford School. So,
great.
Robin.
Great. So thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm Robin Meeks. I'm an associate professor at Duke University in the Sanford School of Public Policy. So there you go. Can skip that one now. Okay. So like Susanna, I study reliability as sort of one aspect of my research. And so we created this figure actually for a recent VoxDev Lit that was launched earlier this year. And the VoxDev Lit was on electricity infrastructure, and our goal there was to summarize the causal evidence that we found coming out of primarily the sort of economics literature that's looking at the causal impacts of different sort of electricity infrastructure interventions. So that was actually written, that paper, VoxDev Lit, was written with the idea of sort of translating that causal evidence for policymakers and sort of people who might not be sort of interested in econometric methods and sort of the things that we might have in the academic papers. So this was actually my effort to make this relationship, a complex relationship, look simpler. You can sort of agree or disagree if this is actually simple. But what we were really trying to show here is sort of this complex relationship between reliability and I guess I would say electricity quality, but when I say electricity quality, what I'm actually referring to is what Susanna was referring to as sort of voltage fluctuations, I guess, sort of. So we wanted to look at the sort of the relationships between reliability, electricity quality, utility or sort of distribution company, financial health. So like sort of how is a distribution company doing financially? And then just sort of demand for end uses and electricity consumption, right? And so you can see from here that it is a very complex relationship with these different parts related to one another. And what I wanted to note on this was first, hopefully it's evident that reliability and power quality or sort of voltage is certainly important in the adoption and use of appliances, which Susanna just highlighted. And we have some work in Nepal looking at electric stoves, and then some other work in Central Asia looking at electric heaters. And I would say that we are certainly finding that reliable and sort of sufficient quality is necessary, but not necessarily sufficient to get people to adopt and use these technologies. And then what I wanted to also highlight is sort of the importance of utility financial health. And that will affect electricity reliability, right? Because it affects how much the utility is collecting from customers. And I'll get to more of that in a moment. But then it also affects sort of how much they can invest in the distribution system, which is important for sort of reliability and power quality in multiple respects, right? And so we have some work that studied that in multiple ways. So my own research is sort of actually addressing multiple points in this very simple diagram here. Okay. But so what I wanted to sort of highlight here is that many of the electricity utilities that are in low and middle income countries are actually struggling financially. And a big challenge is cost recovery. Actually, Nick and his co-authors have a very nice paper that's talking about some of the contributors to cost recovery challenges in low and middle income countries. And two of the parts that I've really focused on in my research and then here in this presentation is thinking about bill non-payment, so the non-payment of bills, and also unbilled consumption, which you might also refer to as electricity theft, okay? And so historically, these have been very difficult challenges for electricity utilities to deal with. So enforcement of bill payment is very costly for utilities. They have to send someone out, a team of people out, to manually disconnect customers if they're not paying their bills. And then unbilled consumption is very challenging for utilities to sort of catch and enforce because there might be political interference. There can be sort of manipulation of meters, but there also can be sort of illegal connections directly to the low voltage distribution wires. Okay, so historically it has been a very big challenge for utilities. And that has contributed to these sort of persistent large differences in losses between low and lower middle income countries and then middle income countries and high income countries that you see here in this figure, okay? I am somewhat optimistic that there's a role for technology and technology adoption to help in these spaces. And so what I'm gonna cover on my next two slides is sort of newer technologies. So with this, I would focus on metering technologies. And then what I would call an older technology that's sort of been more recently deployed for new reasons. And these sort of some of the evidence that's coming out of research is sort of giving me hope on these. With the newer technologies, what we're seeing is more adoption of prepaid meters and then smart meters. There is some evidence from the academic literature looking at prepaid meters. And what they do by requiring prepayment and why they're sort of more commonly deployed by certain utilities in certain countries is that they, by design, they require payment before you're consuming the electricity, right? So it's sort of reducing that cost of enforcement. Smart meters have many potential benefits. We've studied some of them and others, some of the benefits that smart meters might have. So what they can do is they can improve the measurement of electricity consumption just sort of by directly that sort of the technology in the meter. But they also don't require that the utilities send a meter reader out to the household, which also sort of can reduce the potential for collusion between meter readers and the customers, right? So you're sort of taking a human out of at least that part of the problem. They can actually provide evidence, and this sort of gets to one of the things that Susanna was talking about, to consumers of voltage problems, right? And so we saw a study in Central Asia that the smart meters that had these sort of voltage parameters enabled were able to basically, what they do is when the voltage fluctuates outside of what's considered a safe range by the utility, the connection shuts down, right? And all of a sudden, it provides proof for the household to the utility. Look, we've been complaining about this poor quality of voltage, these voltage issues. There's been nothing done for years and years, but look, like our meter keeps shutting down our connection. And so we found in that setting that it was actually sort of providing evidence for the customers that they actually were suffering from these voltage quality problems. And then they can facilitate time of use pricing and sort of demand side management programs. And then from some work actually in the US, we did see that in terms of reliability, they were enabling sort of faster response to outages. Okay, so some lessons that I sort of would take away from this line of evidence. What we've found is that the benefits from the smart meters in particular really depend on the functionalities that are enabled, right? And so often the meters might come with a big suite of functionalities, but the utilities don't necessarily use all of them. So the benefits that they provide depend on those functionalities. Complementary investments may be needed, right? So although you may no longer need meter readers to go out, a utility might need to invest in people that can actually sort of collect and analyze the data.
I think this is a great place to segue into the next one rather than go into the last slide. We can pick that up in the conversation. But thank you, Robin. And then let me next turn it to Samir Ashta from Aprava Energy in India, who's going to talk about smart meters and a program they have with that. So.
Okay, I won't start with my slides because the presentation has been really high quality and my slides are really poor. Oh, see, there is how bad it is. But let me tell you a few anecdotes actually before we get into this. So, some 8 years ago, some of our guys went to some of the remote places in India and they came back with a study and they said, the people believe there are 3 things only available free. Can you guess what? Air, water, and electricity. So that's the sort of framework which I'm building up. And how many of you have lived with receivables which run up to 16 months? Have any of you lived with receivables up to 16 months? Great, I have lived with that. So that is the background I'm trying to put in perspective when we get to the next part. And the third is we did a survey further which found a family with very limited means only needs 3 connections. One is a fan, a 100-watt bulb, and a point to charge the smartphone. I wouldn't say a smartphone. That's what they need. And if you give them that, that's enough for their lifestyle at the moment. And that would cost around about $2.50 to $3 a month, not more than that. That's what is needed. We don't need anything else because India's summers can be really bad. So you need a fan, you need electricity for the child to study in the night. And what can you do without a phone? Can't do without a phone. You can do without a wife, but you can't do without a phone. So that is the basis to which I thought I'll just give you the background on which I'm going to talk about. And when I came here, I saw a lot of people talking about that how we'll use the data. In India, the smart meters are not going to be used for data now. They are not going to be used for data. They're just going to be put in place that people get into the right habit of paying on time. So when I used to work for ICI, a company which is now shut down, there is one word called OTIF. Nobody would pay on time, and people would run up arrears, and the local representatives say, don't pay. The government is coming up with a scheme where they'll give you a reduction of 50%. So guys would wait. And then they would collect again the same guy who represents the government, say, don't worry, it's going to come 75%. So the payments would not come. And the government, just to give you a background, in India, electricity is a state subject as well as a concurrent central subject. So the real policy is made by the center. Every state can set up its own tariff. Now, when you set up your own tariff, what happens? And, you made that point about political things. When you have an election, if you say my tariff is never changed for the last 10 years, who will win the election? The government which does that. So that doesn't change. But by simple economics, if your cost of procurement is going up and you can't bill somebody on time in full, you're going to have a balance sheet which doesn't have any cash, and you keep on borrowing. And just for information, some of the state utilities balance sheets have not yet been prepared for the year ending March 25. Some are still trying March 24. So those are the challenges with which this scheme came up. And with shivering hands, I will try to move it forward. Is this the way to move it forward?
Yeah, it just takes a minute.
Yeah.
Sort of delays.
And this,
Oh, sorry.
oh, sorry.
Is that right? This way.
Okay, so this is what I talked about. So these are the transmission losses. We're talking about 22% of your cost of the electricity which you procured, you could never bill. Now, when you don't bill that, the consequences are obvious. And prior to that, the government gave a lot of incentives. Okay, you do this, we'll give you a discount, we'll give you a subsidy, but get it in place. Nothing happened. So this scheme has got launched in 2021. And the way I've talked about the balance sheets of the utilities, they do not have even the capacity to buy these meters. You cannot ask the customers of the utilities to pay for these meters because, as I explained to you, they are ready to live only with $3 a month of payment. So what the scheme says is, you get a company, which is a company like ours, we will install smart meters and we'll get monthly rentals. But how did the scheme start? The scheme said, you are supposed to get everybody onto a prepaid meter. And why did the government say you get into a prepaid meter? Because people were ready to pay on their phones prepaid. Most of the Indians pay 100 rupees and they get their phone charged and then they... So it sounded very, normal, no? If you can charge your phone for $100, why can't you charge your electricity? But again, the state legislature and the local elected representative comes and say, no. How can you change so many things so fast? So, So the scheme is now on the stage where it's very difficult to guys to get to pay in advance. But having said that, it's happening. So there are some people who have moved on to that and some will move on. What is life? Life is not 10 years, 20 years. It can happen over 100 years. So why worry about 10 years or 7 years or 12 years? This is what happens. So I think by the time I retire or my children retire, we'll have a large percentage of the Indian population which will be on prepaid meters. Because you cannot take the fundamental rights away from a person that you never paid in advance. How can we pay in advance for electricity, which is supposed to be free? So that is one big challenge. So you see the challenges, the thought process, and the political interference. I'll give you an example. We were setting up a project in the east of India, and the state legislature elections are coming in the month of March. And suddenly the installation was stopped. The government was supporting us, but when the election came, it's all stopped. Now I'm sitting on around about 100,000 meters, which nobody's going to pay me for. If BI can give me some money on that, that'll be very nice, actually. Only the interest, nothing more I'm asking for. I'll pay for the meters, but I don't know what to do. And I hope that the party which is said that they will do it wins the election. So we all live in hope. That's how it operates. We all live in hope, I hope all of us have that philosophy. At least I have that philosophy. So that is the challenge which we are talking about. Coming to the point which you made about modernization, digitization, smart metering, operational efficiency, that will happen over a period of time. It will not happen immediately. But what we are doing is we as a company are only in the business of installing meters and ensuring the data moves in time for billing. We do not own the data. And these respective state distribution companies are working with us. How can they use the data? We were talking about it yesterday. So it's going to make a huge change because the state utilities do not know that on any point or any load center, how much load is going to come. Nobody knows. Nobody knows what time there's going to be excess load, where there's going to be less load. It's being monitored at a very macro level. And I'm asked questions, why doesn't India move away from coal? Because coal will remain base load. 64% of India's generation still is on coal. And unless we see the improvements in these parts, you will never see coal going away. You can only wish for it. And having said that, it's a political statement. I don't want to, because America has said, okay, we'll go back to coal, and China is not going back to coal. That's not the point. The point is, unless there is a fundamental change in the way you think, the way you recover money, because you cannot be a generating company can't be taking the whole pressure on. The only way I can take the pressure off is by not paying my lenders. But that's not what we do. In spite of the fact I had 16-month receivables, I honored all my obligations. So those are the challenges which I thought I'll highlight. I hope I haven't stepped beyond my time.
No.
But I thought it was not a good presentation for me to keep on moving my slides.
Great. Great. Let me follow up, Samir, with the question. So if I heard right, you talk about the three things that households need. It's $2.50 a month.
Yeah.
Is that feasible with a smart meter? I mean, what's the cost of a smart? I mean, you have to recover the cost of a smart meter.
So smart
anyway,
meter. So what happens? There is differential pricing.
Yeah.
And the smart meter rentals are not even more than 1% of the total revenue of the state utilities or the respective utilities. Because this payment has to be made in rentals over a 10-year period. So it's not a substantial number.
Okay.
And the government doesn't want that the user pays for the meter. So the guy doesn't have the money he can only pay $2.50 a month. He will not be able to pay for the meter. A meter costs something between 8,000 rupees to 9,000 rupees. There's no way they're going to pay it. So the one part of the scheme is that 1/3 of this will be paid in the form of a subsidy if the meters get installed in time. And if they don't get installed in time, the central government doesn't give that subsidy to the state government. And that subsidy then comes to us.
Okay. So I was going to ask, my thought that came to mind as you were presenting, Susanna, was how much do utilities know about the lack of voltage, and what can they do about it? And you said transformers are an expensive way to go about it. What are the other options? And then Robin kind of answered that question in one way to say, well, these smart meters, at least some of them have the ability to sort of pick up voltage and will shut things off when you go outside voltage. So either directly, because the utility is connected to the smart meter and is able to see that power cut, or through complaints of the customer, they find out that way. And I guess talk through that process. How do we what's the answer to the voltage challenge?
Great question. I don't think we know necessarily the answers. I think there's a couple different large-scale causes. One is just aging infrastructure, right? Where you have old transformers, especially that were built, let's say, before there was significant economic growth or population growth, and so transformers are serving neighborhoods well beyond their capacity, and that has additional consequences for the voltage quality, and that's also what can cause power outages, right? When a transformer fuse blows or something like this is going to be related. And then another big cause where we see a huge relationship is the distance of the low voltage line. And so what you'll see, if there's not enough, let's say, financing to construct additional transformers, you'll say, let's have one transformer somewhere and then try and build out the entire low voltage network from there, especially if it's kind of a rural village and you have a central transformer that's next to, let's say, a school or a hospital or a marketplace. The farther households live from that transformer, the worse that voltage quality gets. And that's a really direct relationship as well. And so to the extent that there's a lot of kind of rural electrification programs that rely on that type of strategy, where it's like construct the transformer first and then build out the low voltage grid, you're going to see those really rapid drops there. So that's just going to require transformer upgrades as well as transformer installations.
And that's so again. So it sounded like you're saying utilities aren't keeping up with the basic maintenance of these and upgrading as things happen. Presumably that's tied somewhat to the revenue issue and the fact that they don't have the money because of the line losses. Is I guess is that what smart meters are gonna solve for us? Or I guess when I think of so I have a smart meter on here and every once in a while Octopus energy sends me an email that says free electricity in this window, or we'll give you, if you cut power in this window. So they're using it as kind of, and so that's how I think of smart meters as being useful as sort of grid reliability. I heard something different in this context. So talk through the what are they going to use smart meters? What are you going to use smart meters for?
Yeah, for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think sort of just, I guess, one of the points that I was making was, the benefits will very much depend on the features that are enabled on the smart meters. I don't think that smart meters alone are going to fix losses and electricity theft, or sort of even with reliability and for power quality, that in order to sort of use those data to understand, like, that there has to be investments in sort of like processing the data and sort of monitoring the data in order to sort of improve it in that way. I worry a lot about sort of that, and I think this gets to sort of some of what Susanna was just talking about. I worry that in a lot of the efforts to sort of electrify poor areas, there are a lot of like cost-cutting measures that happen, right? We try and sort of like, or I say we, institutions try and cut costs. So that might be sort of by having fewer transformers. In the case of one of the cases that I've studied in Pakistan, like they're used, one of the things that's very common in low-income countries is using bare wires in the distribution system. They're cheaper than more expensive distribution lines, but they're really susceptible to theft and like illegal connections. And so one of the things that I worry about is that some of these cost-cutting measures might actually be undermining cost-cutting measures of electrification, the electrification process, are actually undermining the utility and distribution companies' long-run health, right? So if they're sort of they're contributing then to the issue later on, then that will sort of lead back into this issue of not being able to afford to add transformers or replace transformers when they're at end of life, things like that.
Just to add to that, it's this catch-22 between upgrades and revenues, where you absolutely see, okay, if some group of customers is generating very low revenue, the utility is going to have very low incentives to invest money to try and upgrade the quality of that grid. But also, if the quality is low, if voltage is constantly fluctuating, if voltage is damaging your appliances, let's say, then you're not going to buy new appliances. You're going to stay with your really old appliances. You're not going to buy new machinery. And so we're actually seeing that in Ghana, that if you have low quality voltage, you're not upgrading your appliances, and that's going to then, again, eat into the utility's revenue. So it's kind of this catch-22 where one of these needs to change for the other one to change.
Right. So let me hit another place where I think Samira and Susanna, there was a slightly different take. So Susanna, you talked about electric cooking. You talked about three uses. That's $2.50 a month. When I heard that, I thought, well, I could do that with a solar panel and a relatively modest battery. That might be much cheaper than trying to get a line out to places and pay the connection cost and the smart meter cost and all those things. How should we think about what the objective is in this process? Is it electric cooking where the battery and the solar panel might not work, or is it the cell phone, the light, and?
Okay, I think it's a very good question. First of all, the question or the fact is a lot of people in India still don't have electricity, so you need to bring it there. And you said, how do you finance the meters? So we found a way to finance the meters this way. Now you start setting up solar panels on top of houses, and then maintaining them is the second question. As the standard of living improves, you'll see that happening more and more. But there's a different point I want to make. In 2007, when we set up, that's way back, 19 years, I set up my first wind farm. Not one bank wanted to give me money, saying it's unviable. And I had to finally go to ADB to raise the money. Today, the banks come to me and said, whichever project you do, we want to do it with them. So that's the change. Mm-hmm. You'll see in the smart meter the change. The investment which you're trying to make in solar panels across the country is more capital intensive than putting the lines on, because the transmission lines are running across the country now. So there's a huge program to set up transmission lines across the country. And most of the solar farms in India are coming up in remote locations because of the solar intensity. But the point you're making is right. That will happen. But at the moment, there is a all across the country an effort to see that there is a generation which makes it available to people cheaply. Because the challenge which I see is that when how do you can put up a solar panel, then what after that? If it doesn't start working, if you just give somebody a car and doesn't know how to run it and leave it like that. So it's not that simple. Somebody will have to come and repair it, the panels degrade, and then you put a new panel, and all those sort of things happen. So when you have this across the country, so if, we are setting up transmission lines which are around 5 kilometers from the India-Pakistan border. That's where all the transmission lines are going. That's where all the solar farms are coming along. So when you do it at a very large scale, that will make a huge difference. But your point is valid. Somewhere or the other, the microgrids in form of the solar panels is going to be the next step. But at the moment, we are taking one step at a time to make these changes.
So what if we think, so there's a sense in which so what is it, 51 out of 54 electric utility companies in Africa are losing money, right? So they're losing. So that's partly the line losses, it's partly the other things, but is it the costs of connecting the low value users, and how do we either drive the use up or sort of come up with varied solutions that help take some of the pressure off the power companies?
Yeah, so I think the why question, why do we have so many utilities that are losing money? I think absolutely on aggregate, when you are connecting millions of customers that are generating very low revenues, that's going to be a net loss for the utility. And this is where you see that interplay between politics and economics, right? These national electrification programs are often driven by political objectives, even if the specific economic gains for individual households are going to vary a lot. And for some households, those are going to be large, and for some households, they're not going to be large. But I think there's absolutely a question of, okay, now that we have done this, right, whether it was optimal or not, we now have, so in Kenya, for example, 15 years ago, they had 1 million customers. Kenya Power now has 9 million customers. That is a massive increase for a single utility, right? That any company with that level of infrastructure growth is going to struggle. But it's now that that's the case, you have this opportunity, and so just to come back to your question about cooking, right? Of course, there's still many people across the world who don't have access to electricity, and for them, some more efficient type of biomass stove might be the right option. But for all those millions of people who, in the past decade, have gained access to electricity, you can imagine that induction stoves or pressure cookers, or depending on the local needs, are going to be a really good private decision as well as a good social decision.
I'll just comment on that one. For example, we are only doing 10 million meters. The government is giving out tenders for 250 million meters. So if you do 250 million meters and assume there are 4 in a family, the coverage is practically everybody in the country. Right. When you have a coverage, and when the outlook changes, when people's behavior change, they don't change overnight, right, you will see a huge improvement in the balance sheet of the discoms. And that's where the change will come in. So it will take time, but it will happen. I have given you the bad news, but the good news is that once this is rolled out, it will be a very successful program. I have no doubt about that. Not just because our company is doing it, because it has a lot of merit.
We have time for a couple questions, if there are questions from the audience. I think there's a mic coming, so let's wait for that, because we need to. Can you? Yeah. Somebody hand the mic over.
Thank you. Please forgive my ignorance on knowledge of smart meters, but it comes up frequently these days in conversations, particularly in Zambia, for example. There's like a plan to roll out smart meters. So I'm just wondering, what is the financial benefit versus the cost of a rollout of smart meters versus the financial benefit of people having smart meters in the system for the utilities? And at what point does it become actually profitable? Because I assume these devices are not cheap. You probably have to do a lot of work with the public to understand how to use it, what's it used for. So because you said, if everyone had a smart meter, there will be, the utility will flourish. Can someone please elaborate on this
I'll
for
take
me?
that. I'll take that. So first of all, your question is very valid. The way we are doing it is, the smart meter is not being paid by the customer. So the customer is not going to be burdened with the cost. What is it's basically a lease, sort of lease financing. Over a 10-year period, you get a lease rental for a meter, which is $8,000, which is neither here nor there.
So I think it's interesting. There is a really big difference between Africa and India on this element, where in Africa, let's say of those 9 million meters that Kenya Power now has, of the 8 million that are new, basically 100% are prepaid meters, which are not smart meters. So they're quite cheap. They're dumb meters. You have to manually enter numbers, but they avoid all of the billing issues and the non-payment. So if somebody doesn't pay their bill, if they don't top up, they don't have access to electricity. In many African countries, this is the case. Almost all of the new connections that have been made in the past decade have been prepaid meters that are quite cheap. I think the reason that that's been possible is people are going from having no electricity to having electricity. And so then if that's your first, in India, where people are already used to postpaid metering, where you consume however much electricity you want, and you just have to eventually pay it at some time, but to then switch that to a prepaid meter is much trickier. And there, I think there's much more political resistance to this. So I think the questions are very different. And then in Africa, I think you have some smaller programs for smart meter rollout, but there the calculus from a postpaid billing system to a smart meter is going to be very different from a prepaid system to a smart meter. Those are going to have very different pros and cons in each of those locations.
Susanna, presumably you're talking about residential prepaid being residential customers. Is that also true for commercial customers?
Most of those 9 million new connections have been residential connections.
Okay.
But you're absolutely true that certainly medium and large scale industrial customers are all going to be postpaid.
postpaid. Yeah.
I was just going to add, I mean, I think the research that I'm aware of has shown that when prepaid meters are installed in places where they have had post-pay, electricity consumption has gone down, right? So if we think about if the goal is to increase consumption amongst our end users, then there's sort of like a balance with sort of thinking about whether or not prepaid meters are appropriate. So maybe we're in settings where consumption we expect it to be very low for some amount of time. But if we sort of expect that consumption will be higher, grow more quickly, then perhaps smart meters would be more appropriate.
Great. We're at time, so we're going to switch to the other half of the panel, but let's thank the panel. Thanks.